not sure I'm in the right place, but I'm sure that I am with kindred spirits in the sense that we are committed to nonviolence, we are committed to healing, and we are committed to finding ways to make a difference, whatever that looks like. And I want this to be a conversation, and I'm not sure I can follow the chat live. And so Megan, so people feel free to interrupt me. I am interruptible. And Megan, if you see something in the chat that seems worth inserting, let me know, because I'll just go crazy if I try to read the chat too. And I'm a chatter, so I don't mind it. I just can't follow it. So thanks for inviting me. And, you know, from the title of my book, Facing Climate and Social Chaos with Calm and Courage, I do not believe that there are solutions to the climate crisis. I think our 5 years expired a while ago, actually. And that didn't really come home to me until I read a paper in 2018 by Jem Bendell called Deep Adaptation. He was a sustainability professor in England, and he said, "This isn't sustainable. My job is a joke. I'm doing stuff and I know it isn't going to work. And I'm tired of being a fraud. I quit." And he did. And he also, he was kind of the one in his community who said the emperor has no clothes. And we started a movement. I'm not a sustainability professional. I don't know what I am, kind of hard to categorize. Anyways, he started a movement and I hopped on, and the movement is called Deep Adaptation. I think he originally intended it to be a group. So by deep adaptation is like, don't give me these surface solutions. There are no solutions, but how can we embody and enable loving solutions to our predicament? A predicament does not have solutions. A problem has solutions. And the predicament is not only that climate is in a runaway regime, it's not infinite, but we don't know where it's going to stop. And there are planetary systems now set in motion that even if we stop burning carbon tomorrow would still go. And also we haven't slowed down on a global scale. There's also resource depletion. Where our planetary supply chains by which we extract what we need for our first world living from remote areas and displace traditional indigenous people require immense amounts of oil to work, and are running out, are getting harder and harder to find. So those two things colliding means when a place gets wiped out, nobody wants to pay for insurance anymore. And even if you're insured, the insurance company will make sure you don't get very much out of it. And even if you do, housing costs have doubled. And that's just now. They'll be higher later. So this is very grim news. And I sat with this for a good year and a half. And I had trouble crying in the pulpit. That was the thing I did. And I ended up creating like a half-day workshop in the spirit of the work that reconnects, if any of you are familiar with that. I invite you to look into it. It's created by a Buddhist, and I'm blanking on her name, Joanna Macy. Anyways, my workshops were called Grief, Gratitude, and Courage. And I went around asking environmental activists whom I knew. I'm in the activist network in Orange County. There is an activist network in Orange County. It used to be extremely Republican, but it's not anymore. And I said, "Can you use a little grieving?" And they said, "Oh my God, yes." But they weren't telling each other. Some of them were in therapy over their grief. but they weren't telling each other because they had to keep up a happy face and they had to pretend that this was all going to work out. So we got together and we grieved, and it was good. We said things out loud that we weren't allowed to say a lot of places. And then the pandemic happened, and I got online with my workshops. I streamlined and I hosted them through the Deep Adaptation Forum, which gets a lot of people from US, Canada, Europe, UK, Australia, and a few random other places around the globe. I don't remember meeting someone from the Philippines, but we have had people from Singapore and India and a few other places. I've offered many, many groups in that space. I love doing groups, and they're mainly safe spaces for people to say what's really on their heart. In particular, our groups have a little disclaimer at the beginning that they are for people who are collapse aware, meaning it's okay to say, there's no fix to this. It's okay to say, I'm trying to figure out how to hold it together when everything seems broken. And there is a way forward when there's not a fix. I hear so many people give dire climate news in the end say, and of course we must turn this around, which is a nice idea, but not possible in my thinking. And when people realize that that's not possible, the first thing they can do is go into despair and even nihilism. Like, why even bother? Just check out now, whatever that means. Could mean hedonism, could mean suicidal ideation. It's ugly. Whereas if we are embodying and enabling loving solutions, loving responses to our predicament, there's always work to do, no matter what the conditions are on the ground, no matter what the long-term prognosis. And my work in hospice taught me that. You don't say, oh, the condition is fatal, we're done, walk away. God, no. You say, wow, life is so precious. Let's make the best of it. Let's relieve suffering. Let's love on everybody. Let's tell them that death is normal. This is so, so important. And people in our culture don't know it. So I hosted death cafes, if you've heard of such things, welcoming circles, 4Rs circles from Jem Bendel's 4Rs, resilience. Oh boy, I'm never going to remember them. I'll look them up for you later. And grief circles and other groups. And I learned so much from the people that I worked with, but I only have so much reach in these groups. And that's why I wrote the book, to bring my learning and my reflections to more people. And so the book is available for free as a PDF, although I wish you wouldn't please post it on the open web. And it is on the open web as an audiobook for free. And of course, it's also available for purchase, and I'll give you the link. There's a lot in the book in little nuggets, and it kind of falls into 3 areas. The first is the power of stories. So our stories of modernity and progress have failed us. They have brought us to the present impasse. They are beautiful in some ways, you know, the knowledge, the technology, the healthcare, the creativity, and they're fatal to the planet. So there you are. So what? But they shape, industrial consumer society shaped my brain, and I have to recognize the stories that to me are just like the air I breathe. I take them for granted, and I have to hold them up and say, you know what? That's a failed story. I got to try something else. And I don't know how, but I have to find other stories and try them. And the stories that I offer, there are many alternative stories. The stories that I offer are not stories with happy endings. They are stories with brave endings, courageous endings. So there is good work for us to do, no matter how hard the times get. That's the point. My experience is that when a lot of people realize how bad things are as I see it, they equate the end of business as usual, the end of industrial consumer society with all its perks to those of us on the top of the heap, to the end of life on earth. And those are two different things, you know? So radical simplicity and probably radical suffering are in our future, but life has thrived under those circumstances in the past, and perhaps it will again. So stories is the first. The second is tools for adaptation. And that means tools for emotional regulation, because this is hard emotional work, facing so much loss. I mean, I get people who have been environmental activists for 30 years and watched everything being destroyed that they worked for. I watch people trying to help the homeless and just watching the numbers swell and swell and swell. There are young people who are like, why even bother? Why should I even be on this planet? And if you paint them a long-term vision, they're like, but there's no way from here to there. There's no path for me to follow. And maybe that's a challenge for all of us. Certainly it is. I've heard one leadership person who's call it islands of sanity. Like we can't prevent the sinking, but we can create islands of sanity. And the name will come to me, but I would call them islands of compassion. So here's where the book is, like our very sheltered and privileged style of love. Speaking for myself and assuming for many of you here, is not up to the task. And so the book suggests the tools that you need to bring love to deeply challenging situations. And part of it is just tolerance of pain. So I have learned so do you know somebody, are you friends with somebody who is not housed? Okay, when you are, you learn all the things you took for granted. Yeah, and you learn that, you know, that because they're your friend, that person is probably passing as housed, because they're actually really high functioning, and they shouldn't be unhoused. You know, they're not without resources. They have incredible resources to look like a functioning person and to be unhoused, to not have a decent place to sleep or shower. I work with immigrants a little bit, enough to break my heart. And that is as it should be, because it breaks down the illusion that our system is working. Our system is so broken already, and it's breaking more and more. This is something people don't think about with climate change. How much disruption can a social system, a political system takes before it gets really, really messy? You know, and how much is it functioning now or not? Who is it functioning for and who is it not functioning for? This election will probably decide how long our country functions. I think it's that dire. So face and there's a tendency in spiritual circles to be tenderhearted and to either look away from those painful truths or to tell a story about them that somehow excuses them. It's harder to say this is reality and reality sucks, and I'm going to sit with it anyways. So I have, so there's the story, 3 parts of the book: the stories, the tools, and just very briefly, I'll go over, I do some really basic stuff for emotional regulation that I think it's like every human on the planet should be taught that in grade school, and they're not. I mean, I've had people who've been going to professionals for years saying, oh, that was a revelation. It's like, it shouldn't be. You should all know this stuff. So that's chapters 5 and 6. And then the other tool, really crucial tool, is spiritual connection, deep spiritual grounding, to where like the words don't matter, because the felt sense of belonging and knowing that you are cared for and part of something so much larger than yourself. It's in your soul. And so when you hit fear and horror, you don't have to be a little human trying to hold it all in. You've got a deep and wide network to hold you. And however that works for you is fine with me. And that part, I know you guys can get on board with. So those are some of the tools. And then the actions, if you're not trying to fix anything, it's confusing for a while. Like, what am I trying to do? And I think it's very individual. I do not want to make a prescription. I seem to be a compassionate witness, both like holding space for people who are suffering, but then telling their stories to people who don't realize that our system is causing their suffering. That's my particular role. And telling these stories. Your role could be completely different. It could be taking care of your dying mother-in-law. It could be growing a garden and sharing your vegetables. It could be being a storyteller, a teacher, a healer. It could be anything. And it won't save the world, and it's beautiful, and you should do it with all your heart. And I'm learning about something called moral injury. Has anybody heard of moral injury? And this is putting some pieces into place for me. Thank you for that summary, Rana. Yeah, love is love, with or without hope. And I have hope. I just don't have hope in saving the world. I have hope that people will love each other through tough times, and that will help a lot. It won't stop suffering, but it will ease a lot of suffering. I mean, so we are poised to start a whole bunch of more wars. Maybe somebody somewhere can ameliorate some of that. That would be worthwhile. So moral distress and moral injury, when you are part of a system that is hurting people, you experience moral distress. And if that moral distress really impacts you, messes with your functioning, then you have moral injury. We are all in a broken system. If our eyes are open, we will experience moral distress. And if we are working our spiritual program, it need not go all the way to moral injury. This is the reason why so many healthcare workers and teachers quit in the pandemic, because they didn't want to witness. They were trying to do their jobs and they couldn't. And they just became morally exhausted, emotionally, spiritually exhausted. And that's how it's going to go from now on. We're not going to have the resources to do things properly a lot of the time. So we have to face our moral distress. And this, I think, is what a lot of us went through with the murder of George Floyd, was that we had to face that our country's law enforcement was deeply, deeply broken, those who didn't already know it. And then if you learn the history, you learn that our government has institutionalized that racism in a way that has destroyed people for generations. And that is, and to learn, so there's a deep investment in pretending that bad things aren't happening, because learning that bad things are happening cites you in moral distress. You have no choice but to live in that place. And I mean, really, who wants to? But that's humanity. And now I've done a lot of talking and I've said a lot of hard things. I'm sorry. And so I have a deep spirituality, and the words keep morphing on me because it's not about the words. But I do not have a spirituality of easy solutions. My God and my, so yeah, I guess I can be explicit. So I follow Jesus, and I believe that there are other compassionate, helping spirits around. As you'll see in my book, I have a neo-shamanic practice, not trying to appropriate anything, through Michael Harner. And what I experience is I am deeply loved and resourced, and nobody's gonna magically fix anything. That's not how it works. That's my experience of my spirituality. But I am never alone. I'm never without resources. One of the things that I didn't really understand grief until I started this work. I don't know that anybody understands it, perfectly, but I have a lot better sense of it than I used to. And one of the things I've realized, it's not an emotion, it's a process. And it requires time and space, which of course it doesn't get in our culture. So a lot of people have a lot of pent-up grief, and they're scared of grief. And they think that if they start grieving, they're going to fall in a hole and never come out. Or why are you being so negative with all those grief groups? And what I've learned is that grief is a process. It's like a river that you cross from, oh, I have the thing, to, oh, the thing is gone, from physically at least, or whatever the thing is. It could be, you can grieve anything. You can grieve an idea, a story that doesn't work anymore. And that process is a healing process. It's not it's not fun, but it can be truly healing. And people ask me, so, once you realize the state of the world, can you just get over your grieving and move on? How long does it take? And for those of us who've been doing this work, it comes and goes, and it doesn't control our lives. And we welcome it, because our grief is our love. My personal take is that our brains and our upbringing and experiences filter those to us in a certain way, so that we experience one kind of spiritual being or another kind of spiritual sense. And we don't have to say it, it's an individual thing. Yeah, I am receiving support and wisdom from the spiritual realm, and the details of how I do it, I don't have to prove to somebody else. So I'll say that with respect to, like, I don't have to do it the way you do it, and you don't have to do it the way I do it. That's what I'm trying to say. There was one other thing. So in the Deep Adaptation Forum, we have two kind of overtly spiritual practices that happen weekly that you can join. And I'll put a link in the chat. One of them interferes with my church, so I don't do that one. It's called Wider Embraces. And it's a great form of spirituality for atheists, of which there are a lot in Europe, and this is a European, well, British organization. And it's meditating being part of a community, all different communities at all different scales, from the cosmos to the cells in your body and everything in between. And just doing that group meditation, and then people kind of report in what they've experienced. It's so connecting. It makes you part of something larger than yourself, whether or not you have any formal spiritual religious beliefs. It's really wonderful. The other one that we do in the forum is earth listening. And that is like, let's see, Emma Mary Gathergood, that's really her name, says, we know we love the earth, but the earth loves us too. And we need to feel that and take strength from that and wisdom. And so she sends us out to imagine ourselves, or I just walk out in my backyard because I love my garden, and experience, like bring a question or an issue to nature in that setting, and see what nature does or says. And it's just beautiful what people come up with, sometimes heady stuff, but sometimes very rich relational stuff, sometimes really profound spiritual or psychological stuff. And I like to do, at the end of my grief circles, I like to do a grounding meditation, which literally has people imagining that roots are coming out of the bottom of their feet. And so they're really grounded in the earth and they're really part of something huge. It's a lot of fun. I think children are capable of doing grief rituals. There's something about an embodied ritual that is just a lot more conducive to processing grief than thinking about it. Thinking about it is probably the least helpful. Talking about it is helpful. And especially if you've got somebody who can guide you through complicated grief to help uncomplicate it. You can read my book for that one. Complicated grief, not a thing. Normal, but not helpful. But doing a ritual, and there's a particular reference that I can offer you. And let me see if I have it on my shelf. Yeah. So Trebbie Johnson, Radical Joy for Hard Times. You don't have to buy the book. She's got a really good website as well. And she has been grieving for the earth a long time. And she makes art out of her grief. And she convenes grief rituals all over the US for what is lost. And it helps. Speaking it helps, and doing rituals for it helps. So in my neighborhood, they were trying to, it's a university faculty neighborhood, they were trying to pack more houses in a smaller space. So they tore down an old school 1960s apartment block to build higher density housing. What they didn't tell us was that they were going to tear down every tree around there right up to the sidewalk. And those trees were not old growth. They were probably max 50 years old, but we loved them. They were our friends, and we didn't know how much we loved them until they were gone. So being in a group that was talking about my book, I said, we could have a grief ritual for that. And they did. And I didn't even have to organize it, which was a miracle. And so about 20 people gathered in the twilight and spoke love and grief to the trees. We lit candles, and it was beautiful. And it didn't change a thing except us. We paid proper attention to those beings. We honored their passing, and possibly will be organized to influence the time they tear down the next stand of trees, which they do, because unfortunately the neighborhood is run by people who do not know how to manage housing. They only know how to build it. And they've run out of space. Now they have to start tearing down the trees.
You.
Yeah, and so I would never tell a child we're going to fix this, because that would set them up for a very big fall at some point. I would tell them, we're going to love it, and we're going to do the best we can. And so taking a local action that has a local effect might be helpful. In our area, that might look like a beach cleanup.